going on, guys? Nathan Barna here. If you're part of the online team or you're one of my holistic lifestyle or performance coaching clients, you probably have taken the Primal Pattern Questionnaire. And basically, if you haven't, that's the questionnaire that allows you to determine what your best meal proportions should be. That's going to be ideal for your metabolism. So you can have a polar type. You can be a polar type, which is basically saying that you do better eating more fat and protein relative to carbohydrates, or you could be a equatorial type, which basically means that you would probably be more suited to eat a diet higher in carbs and lower in fats and protein. Or you could be a variable type, which is someone that might do well on both depending on the circumstance, or that might do well just going basically 50-50 fat protein to carbohydrates. And then in the questionnaire, in the breakdown, it kind of explains an easy way to tell you what constitutes fat and protein relative to what constitutes carbohydrates. And they use the term eyes versus no eyes. And basically the foods that have eyes, so most of your animal, your flesh foods, those are going to be your fat and protein sources. And then foods that have no eyes, so like a potato and an apple, these are going to be your carbohydrate sources. So based on how you filled out the questionnaire, based on your responses, you've probably found that you are a polar type, an equatorial type, or a variable type. And what I usually tell my clients is that when you take the questionnaire and the results aren't set in stone, just because you answered a certain way doesn't mean you're locked into a certain way of eating for the rest of your life. It simply just gives you a framework to move by, to kind of play with, so that you can start to fine tune the process and find your own unique style or a way of eating or way of having meal proportions that's going to be best suited for you. And to kind of take a step back and break things down a little bit, the metabolic typing or the primal pattern typing has a lot to do with your genetics and your ancestry. So if your ancestors were from a region where the ground froze over and there wasn't access to vegetation or plant life year round, then they had to rely on animal sources for food. And like we just said, animal sources or eye foods, those are going to be your fat and fat and protein source. Or the equatorial type, where your ancestors came from a region that was closer to the equator, where the ground, where it didn't freeze over and there was access to vegetation year round, then your metabolic type might be more suited towards higher carbohydrates relative to fat and protein, because there was more access to plant foods. And this is where that process of individualization comes in, and the personalization and customization, because if I were to just say that, eat this proportion and this is the right one for everyone, and I would be doing a big disservice. And that's something that is kind of heavily pushed, and I see a lot in this industry where some study comes out or some expert says something, and then everybody takes it as gospel and thinks that just because something works for one person, it has to work for everybody. when in reality we're just as different on the inside as we are on the outside. And it's been shown that even people within the same family, within the same immediate family, like your brother or sister or mom or dad, can have completely different metabolic type. So when we work with people, it's not just to tell you what to eat, it's fine-tuning the process and guiding you through the process of figuring out what's going to be the best diet for you. And again, this could even change, from different times in your life and even day to day, depending on your circumstances. You might find that if you're, doing a lot of exercises or doing a lot of heavy lifting, you might feel better or be more inclined to eat more fat and protein relative to carbohydrates, even if you are tested as an equatorial type, and vice versa. So again, the questionnaire in itself is just a general framework for you to start your journey with, so that you can start to get involved in the process and fine tune along the way. And that's what I'm doing these videos and kind of trying to guide you guys towards. And then obviously the people that I work with individually, that's the process that we go through, figuring out how to develop that relationship with your body so that you have an intuitive and instinctual sense of what you need to eat on a day-to-day, moment-to-moment basis. So along with that, something that you guys can start to utilize when you're trying to figure out and fine-tune your own diet is the concept of finding your power zone. Because most of the time when you eat, or really every time when you eat, your body is giving you signals and symptoms as to if what you ate was supportive or if what you ate maybe was not supportive, or at least not supportive at that time. So usually, if you have a meal that's too high in fat and protein, you might feel kind of bogged down and slow and sluggish, and you might feel like you need something to pick you up, versus if you've had a meal that might be too high in carbohydrates, you might get a rush, or you might feel anxious, or you might get a rush and then crash, and then again, we kind of all are familiar with that cycle, and that's telling you that what you ate was out of balance for what your body needed. So anytime that you eat a meal, you can start to pay attention to different signs and symptoms that your body is giving you, and you can make adjustments. Either if you catch it in time, you can make immediate adjustments. Like if you feel bogged down because you had too much fat and protein, you could maybe incorporate some kind of fruit or some kind of carbohydrate source that might kind of put you back into balance. Or if you had too many carbohydrates, you could find a fat and protein source that can help you get back into that optimal power zone. Because I feel like, contrary to what a lot of people are used to, when you eat a meal, you should feel good. You should feel energized. You shouldn't feel like you need to go take a nap right away. That's not a good thing. That usually means that you're, again, either eating the wrong proportion, or you're eating things that your body is having reactions to, or you're intolerant to, that is causing an immune response and draining your body's resources and energy. So in that power zone, like I said, you should feel good after you eat a meal. So fine-tuning your diet to whatever you have to do to find that optimal power zone. And this all has to do with kind of blood sugar management, because that's where a lot of people get caught up, especially in our standard American diet, or SAD diet, full of carbohydrates and refined foods, additives, and preservatives, SAD crap diet, where it's very carbohydrate heavy, and it leaves a lot of people riding that blood sugar roller coaster of highs and lows and highs and lows, And then inevitably, this leads to insulin resistance, which leads to prediabetes and diabetes, as as is so prevalent in our society today. And for my own observations, I find that, especially being a white dude that has, European ancestry, where usually it's more of the polar type, I'm personally suited to higher fat and protein relative to carbohydrates. And, that's where a lot of white people, not all, but a lot, just because of our ancestry, we are suited towards a lot to a polar type relative to the equatorial type. And so if you take someone that has adapted to have a polar type metabolism, and you keep feeding them carbohydrates and sugars basically, then there's no wonder that there's going to be an imbalance there. And that's where some people can eat that stuff, and because their metabolism is more suited towards a higher carbohydrate diet, they may do better off of eating the same diet, even if it's not the healthiest food. And that's kind of what you can see if you observe and look around. People of different backgrounds and different ancestry are able to tolerate the same diet very differently. And then again, going back to the saying of we're as different on the inside as we are on the outside. So when you're figuring out what proportions are best for you, if you're a polar type, then, if you're looking at your plate of food, then ideally you're going to want anywhere from one or 2 or 3 servings to 1 serving of carbohydrates. So typically 1 serving of a fat and protein source is going to be about the width of your palm minus your fingers, and a serving of carbohydrates is typically going to be about the size of your whole hand, about a handful. So when you're looking at your plate, if you want to start to play around with your proportions to meet your metabolic type, then again, if you're a polar type, then try to start with 2 servings of protein, fat source, 2 servings of eyes, relative to 1 serving of no eyes. And then again, and reverse the proportion if you're an equatorial type, 2 servings of no eyes relative to 1 serving of eyes. And then if you're a variable type, you can play around with either or try to go 50-50, 1-to-1 ratio. And I personally find that, again, it kind of changes with what I'm doing in my activity level. If I'm training, like I am right now, if I'm training consistently really hard, then I find that I'm almost more of a variable type, even though the questionnaire says that I'm a polar type, just because I feel that my body needs those extra carbohydrates along with the fat and protein to help give my body the quick necessary energy that it needs to sustain my energy level and performance level when I'm training. So just take this idea, and if you've done the Primal Pattern questionnaire, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, you can sign up for our online training system, and you'll have access to take that questionnaire to start to figure these things out for yourself and start to fine-tune your own diet. Because again, remember, there's no one size fits all approach to this. This is why I created this system, so that there's an customization and personalization process behind it. So you're not just getting thrown into a system that everybody else is doing the same exact thing. If you guys have any further questions about this, feel free to reach out to me. I'm sure I'll kind of touch on these different topics as we continue along with this. But I look forward to seeing your guys' journeys and helping you in any way I can. So until next time, keep crushing it, keep pursuing your dreams, and keep loving life. I'm out.